There is a continent at the bottom of the world that behaves like a locked room. No roads, no cities, no forests. Only wind, white silence, and ice so thick it buries landscapes the way oceans bury shipwrecks. Antarctica is often described as empty, but that word is a convenience. Because empty is what we say when we cannot see what lies underneath. And underneath is the unsettling part. Beneath kilometers of ice, the continent is not flat. It has mountain ranges, deep basins, ancient river valleys, and lakes sealed in darkness for millions of years. In some places, radar reveals shapes that look like ridgelines and plateaus, features that feel too structured, too deliberate, if you let your imagination linger for even a second. Add to that the peculiar fact that Antarctica was not always an ice tomb. Long ago, it carried forests. It had warmth. It had seasons that did not kill. So the question forms naturally, almost against your will. If Antarctica was once habitable, who or what could have been there before the ice arrived? This is where the mystery begins to tighten, not with a single artifact held in a museum, but with a pattern of anomalies, old maps, half-misunderstood data, and the human obsession with the idea that something important is hidden where no one can reach it. Over the decades, rumors have clung to Antarctica like frost. Tales of impossible ruins, of structures glimpsed in satellite images, of civilizations beneath the ice erased by a sudden planetary shift. The scientific world insists the continent holds geological history, not human history. And yet, the more Antarctica is studied, the more it becomes clear that it is not just a wasteland. It is a vault made of ice, thick enough to preserve, thick enough to conceal, and old enough to turn the difference between fact and speculation into something dangerously easy to confuse. If there were secrets down there, real ones, Antarctica would be the perfect place to hide them. Not because anyone chose it, but because the Earth itself did. To understand why Antarctica became a canvas for such extraordinary speculation, it is necessary to look far beyond the age of human civilization and into the deep mechanics of the planet itself. Antarctica was not always frozen. Geological evidence shows that for much of its ancient past, the continent occupied a different position on Earth and existed under a radically different climate regime. Hundreds of millions of years ago, it was part of Gondwana, a vast supercontinent that included Africa, South America, Australia, and India. During that time, Antarctica supported forests, rivers, and complex ecosystems. Fossilized tree rings, pollen deposits, and plant remains confirm that temperatures were once mild enough to sustain life on a scale impossible today. The transformation began gradually, then accelerated. As tectonic plates shifted, Antarctica drifted southward, eventually isolating itself over the South Pole. The opening of ocean gateways allowed powerful circumpolar currents to form, cutting off warm water from the north. Over millions of years, ice sheets expanded, thickened, and locked the continent into the frozen state we know now. In some regions, ice accumulated to depths exceeding 4 kilometers, burying the original landscape under a weight that reshaped the crust itself. What complicates this story is timing. While Antarctica has been ice-covered for millions of years, there were intervals, particularly during warmer phases, when parts of the continent may have been seasonally ice-free or significantly less hostile than today. These windows were not recent in human terms, but they are recent in geological ones. This creates a subtle but important ambiguity. The continent's current desolation does not perfectly represent its entire history. Human fascination intensified in the modern era, when exploration replaced myth. Early expeditions found no ruins, no artifacts, no evidence of human occupation, but they also revealed something unexpected. The land beneath the ice was not inert. Radar surveys showed mountain chains rivaling the Alps, vast subglacial lakes, and complex terrain preserved as if frozen in time. Antarctica was not just a slab of ice, it was a hidden continent. It is within this gap, between what Antarctica is now and what it once was, that the mystery takes root. The mystery does not begin with a discovered city or a carved stone pulled from the ice. It begins with absence, and with questions that science can narrow, but not entirely close. If Antarctica was once temperate, and if it possessed rivers, forests, and stable seasons, then it was not fundamentally different from other regions that later became cradles of life and, eventually, civilization. Yet, unlike every other habitable landmass on Earth, Antarctica presents a complete silence where human history should be tested, not confirmed. No tools, no bones, no settlements. Only ice, layered so thick that it effectively deletes whatever came before. This raises an uncomfortable uncertainty. Is the absence of evidence truly evidence of absence, or simply the result of an environment that hides its past too well? Radar imaging has revealed geometric-looking formations beneath the ice, straight-edged ridges, symmetrical peaks, and plateau-like structures that, when isolated in images, appear suggestive. Scientists explain these as natural geological features shaped by tectonics and erosion long before ice entombed them. Yet the human mind is drawn to pattern, especially when context is incomplete. The mystery persists, not because the data proves anything extraordinary, but because it does not fully eliminate doubt. Adding to this uncertainty are ancient maps, most famously those that appear to depict a southern landmass without ice, centuries before Antarctica was officially discovered. Mainstream scholarship attributes these to speculative geography, misinterpreted coastlines, or composite maps stitched together from incomplete knowledge. Still, the coincidence unsettles some researchers, not because the maps are accurate, but because they reflect an old intuition, that the southern world held something important. There is also the question of time. If anything had existed on Antarctica before it froze, it would have belonged to a world far older than human civilization as we know it. A world whose traces, if any remain, would be crushed, distorted, and buried beneath kilometers of ice. In such conditions, even monumental structures would not announce themselves easily. The mystery, then, is not a claim of a lost civilization, but a boundary problem. It is the tension between what can be investigated and what is physically unreachable. Antarctica guards its past, not with secrecy, but with pressure, cold, and depth, forces that erase context faster than they reveal it. What we know about what lies beneath Antarctica does not come from excavation, but from indirect observation. Drilling through kilometers of ice is rare, dangerous, and limited to narrow scientific objectives. Instead, researchers rely on radar, seismic waves, gravity measurements, and ice cores, methods that reveal structure without revealing story. Radar surveys have mapped an entire hidden world. Beneath the ice are mountain ranges longer than the Rockies, vast basins pushed below sea level by the sheer weight of ice, and networks of ancient river channels carved when liquid water still shaped the land. These features are unmistakably natural in origin, formed over tens of millions of years, yet their preservation is extraordinary. The ice did not erode them away, it sealed them, freezing a deep-time landscape in place. Among the most remarkable discoveries are subglacial lakes, some larger than modern cities, trapped beneath the ice under immense pressure. Lake Vostok, isolated for millions of years, contains a liquid water that has never seen sunlight in the age of humanity. These environments prove that Antarctica is not dead beneath the ice, it is merely inaccessible. They also demonstrate how effectively ice can preserve ancient conditions, raising inevitable questions about what else might remain intact below. Ice cores provide another line of evidence. By extracting cylinders of compressed snow and air bubbles, scientists reconstruct climate histories stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. These records show that Antarctica's transition into deep freeze was neither smooth nor uniform. There were periods of instability, warming pulses, and rapid shifts that transformed the continent faster than ecosystems could adapt. If anything fragile existed on the surface during those transitions, it would not have endured long enough to leave obvious traces. Crucially, no verified human artifacts have ever been found beneath Antarctic ice. This absence is often presented as a definitive answer, but scientifically, it is a limit, not a conclusion. Less than a fraction of a percent of the continent has been directly sampled. Most of what lies below remains inferred, not observed. The discoveries tell a clear story about geology and climate, They are silent on civilization, and it is within that silence, structured, measured, and vast, that speculation finds room to breathe. Within mainstream science, the explanation for Antarctica's silence is direct and unsentimental. The continent did not hide a forgotten civilization because, according to all available evidence, none ever existed there during the age of humanity. The primary argument is chronological. Modern humans emerged roughly 300,000 years ago. By that time, Antarctica was already locked into a deep freeze. Ice sheets had expanded across the continent, temperatures had dropped far below survivable thresholds, and the land had become isolated by powerful ocean currents. Even during warmer interglacial periods, conditions would have been hostile beyond anything early humans could endure or adapt to. There is no known window in which human civilization, or even sustained human presence, could plausibly have existed. Geology reinforces this view. The features detected beneath the ice, mountain ranges, valleys, ridges, and plateaus, align precisely with known tectonic processes. Similar formations exist on every continent, shaped by plate movement, erosion, and ancient river systems. When viewed without scale or context, some structures may appear artificial, but when placed within the broader geological framework, their origins are consistent and repeatable. Mainstream researchers also point to the absence of cultural signatures. Wherever humans have lived, even briefly, they leave patterns: tool debris, altered landscapes, traces of fire use, chemical changes in soil. None of these indicators have been detected in Antarctic samples. Ice cores, sediment layers, and subglacial studies show no disruption consistent with human activity. Ancient maps that appear to depict Antarctica without ice are likewise explained through historical context. Early cartographers often combined speculation, traveler accounts, and inherited geographic theories into composite images. Coastlines were guessed, exaggerated, or misinterpreted. What appears in hindsight to be precise knowledge is better understood as educated imagination constrained by limited data. From the mainstream perspective, Antarctica is not a lost chapter of human history. It is a geological archive, one that preserves the story of Earth's climate, plate tectonics, and long-term environmental change, but not the rise or fall of civilization. And yet, even within this explanation, one detail remains quietly unsettling. The certainty does not come from exhaustive exploration, but from probability. Antarctica is understood not because it has been fully revealed, but because what we know makes other possibilities unlikely. Despite the clarity of mainstream explanations, alternative theories continue to orbit Antarctica, drawn less by evidence than by implication. These ideas do not claim firm proof. They arise from the uncomfortable truth that Antarctica is one of the least accessible places on Earth, and that inaccessibility leaves room for speculation. One recurring theory suggests that Antarctica may have been ice-free far more recently than generally accepted, perhaps due to rapid, catastrophic climate shifts rather than slow geological processes. Proponents point to abrupt climate transitions recorded in ice cores elsewhere on the planet, arguing that if ice can form quickly, it might also disappear quickly under the right conditions. In this scenario, a brief habitable window could have existed, long enough for a non-industrial civilization to emerge and vanish before being sealed under ice. This idea remains highly controversial and lacks direct physical support. Another theory focuses on the possibility of a pre-human or non-human advanced culture. Not necessarily human in the modern sense, but an intelligent civilization that existed millions of years ago, long before Homo sapiens appeared. Advocates argue that geological time is vast enough to allow for the rise and erasure of complex societies without leaving obvious traces. Critics respond that industrial activity, metallurgy, and large-scale construction would almost certainly leave detectable chemical or stratigraphic signatures. None have been found. There are also interpretations centered on suppressed or misinterpreted data. Satellite imagery, showing symmetrical formations, unusual heat signatures beneath the ice, or anomalous radar reflections, is often cited as evidence that something artificial may exist below. Scientific institutions explain these anomalies as sensor artifacts, natural subglacial volcanism, or known geological structures. Still, the perception of secrecy, driven by restricted access, military treaties, and the continent's protected status fuel suspicion more effectively than evidence ever could. Some theories take a symbolic rather than literal approach. They suggest that Antarctica functions as a psychological projection, a blank space onto which humanity projects fears of lost knowledge and erased history. In this view, the civilization beneath the ice is not a physical claim, but a reflection of discomfort with how incomplete our understanding of deep time truly is. None of these theories overturn established science, but they persist because Antarctica resists closure. It cannot be casually excavated, casually visited, or casually explained. The continent enforces uncertainty by its very nature. Antarctica matters because it represents the outer limit of what humanity can know with confidence. It is a place where data thins out, access collapses, and certainty becomes probabilistic rather than absolute. In an age accustomed to instant answers and satellite-fed omniscience, that alone is unsettling. Scientifically, Antarctica is a keystone for understanding Earth's future. The ice holds detailed records of past climate transitions, how quickly temperatures can shift, how ice responds to warming, and how planetary systems cross thresholds from stability into irreversible change. These lessons are not abstract. They directly inform how modern civilization prepares for environmental disruption. Culturally, the continent exposes a deeper anxiety. Throughout history, humans have struggled with the idea that knowledge can be erased, that entire chapters of the past might vanish without witnesses. Antarctica embodies that fear. Not because it hides a civilization, but because it proves how completely environments can overwrite history. Ice does not preserve meaning. It preserves matter, and even that imperfectly. There is also a psychological dimension. The idea of secrets beneath the ice persists because Antarctica is one of the few places left where exploration still feels unfinished. Oceans have been mapped, continents cataloged, space observed. Antarctica remains resistant. That resistance invites imagination, and imagination fills gaps faster than evidence can. Whether or not anything extraordinary lies beneath the ice, Antarctica reminds us that absence is not always emptiness, and that some questions endure not because they are unanswerable, but because the cost of answering them is too high. Antarctica does not whisper its secrets, it buries them. Beneath the ice lies a continent shaped by deep time, preserved in silence by pressure and cold. Mountains stand where no one has seen them. Rivers remain frozen in their ancient paths. Lakes exist in darkness, untouched by sunlight for millions of years. This alone is extraordinary, regardless of whether civilization ever touched its surface. The idea of a hidden civilization persists, not because evidence demands it, but because Antarctica represents a rare truth. There are places on Earth where certainty ends. The continent resists narrative. It offers data without story, structure without context, and depth without disclosure. If nothing lies beneath the ice but stone and water, Antarctica is still a reminder of how thoroughly the planet can erase its own history. And if something more did exist, something fleeting, fragile, and long gone, it would be buried so completely that even asking the question feels audacious. What Antarctica ultimately reveals is not a lost civilization, but the boundary between knowledge and speculation. It is a place where imagination presses against science, and science answers only as far as the ice allows. And until that ice yields, the secrets of the southern continent, real or imagined, will remain exactly where they have always been, out of reach